So I will stop talking. I'd like to invite the first panel. Before you come, there's a couple of things. I just put my phone on silent, so maybe you can too, just don't forget. We'll have a coffee break. We've got 3 sessions until the coffee break, so if you can hold on until then. One of the other things which was quite, one of the advantages of this room is that we have chairs and we have places to stand at the back. One of the disadvantages is that after the coffee break, people are still talking in the back of the room while somebody is up here on stage, panelists or whatever, presenting super interesting information. So maybe if you need to have a chat, there's also a meeting room upstairs for the kind of longer chats that you might want to extend beyond the coffee break. So that would be great. So, panel, please come and join us on stage. So we've got Alessandro. So we've got Alessandro Grasso, who is moderating the panel. He is not the kind of person we normally see on stage at a sustainable finance conference. He's an aerospace engineer. Welcome, Alessandro, from the Luxembourg Space Agency. He is leading the Earth observation activities at the Space Agency. He's also representing Luxembourg at the European Commission Copernicus Space Project, at the, I need to check my notes, in the European Space Agency, exactly, also on Earth observation. Maybe I let you introduce your panel, but very expert people who've got lots of things to tell us. So welcome, and please go ahead.
Hello, hello, test. Does it work?
Yeah, it's working.
Can you hear me well? Yes, perfect. Here, like this, perfect. Good, okay, so thank you very much for the lovely introduction, and welcome back to this second day. Again, you have quite a rather unconventional topic, space, but not so much since you were already introduced to it yesterday by Bettina Werner from Deloitte. So this is a very nice follow-up to the presentation of Bettina, and which was, by the way, very much spot on the topic. We have now here today with us a really interesting and knowledgeable panel setting, representing a very wide spectrum of the facets of space, and not only technical. So I will start just from here on my right with Lucien Hoffmann, Science Director of LIST, and Sabrina Alam, Director of Space and Defense and Advisor for ESG at KPMG, Luis Bandera, the CEO of Metricsat, and Antonella Calvia-Goetz, Principal Advisor for Innovation at the EIB. All of them have an amazing CV, which I invite you to also go and read on the website, which is published. But they represent here finance, economy, physicists, we have scientists, so really engineering, a really wide spectrum of activities. Good, so we will now make a start. The session, as you saw, is called Space Data-Driven Finance, Navigating the Future with Space-Enabled Intelligence. And this is key, because space really is an area where in the future will play a big role also in finance, and we are very much convinced of that. Hopefully we can also convince you today about this. And so without any further ado, to get you warmed up as well, we will show you a little bit of what is possible with space data, and Lucien has kindly agreed to show you a few slides, but we are missing the clicker. I don't know if we have a clicker. Perfect.
Sure. I think it just worked.
So I will leave now the floor to Lucien to show you a little bit what is possible with Earth observation data.
Yeah, so with, I think, the integration of ESG factors in financial decision-making, it becomes more and more important also to have the relevant data to do this. And we think that space data can really be a very great help here, because the potential of Earth observation has really increased dramatically over the last years with an exponential growth of more and more satellites that are in orbit. The spatial resolution is increasing. And so the space-based sensing really now delivers data almost for the whole world at a daily pace and at a square meter spatial resolution. So really we are now in a situation to really deliver information for decision taking. In addition, of course, this creates a lot of data. Also, computing power has dramatically increased, and also here in Luxembourg, you know that we have Meluxina, a very high performance computing facility where also AI will be added, quantum computing facilities will be added. So also the facilities to handle this very high masses of data has also very much increased. And then, of course, we need to handle this data, to treat this data. And so there, of course, advancements in artificial intelligence are also very important to handle this complex data and to extract the relevant information. And so with this, these data are now also increasingly available, of course, for the financial sector to make the necessary analysis. And so this spatial data can benefit financial management. On the one hand, as said, we have now high frequency data, very high resolution data. They are low cost. Many of these data are freely available, so it's not very expensive. This is also an independent way to have data. You can have data, let's say, remotely, and also in very, let's say, maybe in regions where there is war, and they are globally consistent because you have the same algorithms that are used all over the place. And so some use cases interesting for the financial sector. So, for example, for the verification of accountability of companies also in very remote areas or areas that are difficult to access during war. Here we have an example of mines for rare earth elements in Myanmar, where you have often, let's say, conflicts, so not easy to go on the ground to make observations. And there, with Earth observation data, you can, as mapped here, see where are the mines operational. These small circles indicate water pools where the rare earth elements are extracted, so with dangerous chemicals which end up often then in the river system and so on. And so here in one image you can have a very nice information on these activities. Also of interest, of course, in the ESG context, to track emissions by companies where Earth observation data can give an indication of the composition of emissions and on their concentration. So on your left side, you see emissions from a factory of methane, which is one of the greenhouse gases, and on the right side, a CO2 map around an industrial area. Also, to monitor the impact of human activities, like for deforestation, so we can now have sequences of Earth observation data since 25 years. And you see on the left side an example of deforestation in Southern America, and you see that the green spots rapidly decrease, showing this importance of deforestation. Can also be looked at in our landscapes to see what is the diversity of different ecosystems, and then, of course, to monitor the ecosystems over time, so also linked to biodiversity aspects. Also of interest for the insurance industry, especially linked to disaster management, where space technologies can be of interest to look at the risk, to make the risk assessment, to monitor the portfolio of assets that are in flooded areas, to make damage assessment after the flood. So during the whole life cycle of disaster management, Earth observation can support important decisions making for the insurance industry. Also, and this is now also relevant for, let's say, systemic banks in Europe, for example, to make the assessment of climate risk on the assets. And there also we can have use Earth observation data to link them with climate models, with hydrological models, for example, to see what will happen if the flooding return period will increase, how my assets in that flooding zones will be impacted to take decisions for investment or for insurance sector. So these are some of the examples in which Earth observation really can today provide worldwide information at a very high spatial and temporal resolution.
Thank you very much, Lucien, for your presentation. And so, from a LIS perspective, which areas are you active in and developing at the moment?
So we are especially developing activities around disaster management, and this worldwide. One of the most important is flood risk management, but also earthquakes, where you can rapidly in cities make an assessment of the damages at a very high spatial resolution. Also of interest for humanitarian aid institutions, for civil security, to see where you can bring in the people to help the goods to help in areas that are heavily impacted.
Thank you, Lucien. And Louise, maybe a question for you. So we've seen now what Earth observation can do. So how do you get from the images to a service that then can be used by the companies? And so from a technological standpoint, and where and how do you see this becoming a game changer for the financial stakeholders?
Thank you, Alessandro. Yeah, I think it works. So actually, you've seen the use cases that Professor Hoffman have presented, yeah? So now the challenge we see, where the gap that we need to bridge is, how do we take all these use cases and potential of satellite data to make it palatable for the financial institution? Imagine, for example, in the case of a portfolio, I have a portfolio across different sectors, across different geographies. And for this, let's say specifically in terms of climate and environmental risk, satellite data is the saving grace for the financial institutions here, because with this, when done at asset level, which is now possible, you have 1,000 assets in your portfolio. You can actually be able to profile your portfolio in terms of you see your risk concentration. You can make better decisions using satellite data. And this is not even possible. For example, you might be operating in an assumption that, okay, you have your investment maybe in solar projects because you know, it's a tropical area, the sun is there, but is this really enough? Satellite gives us real quantitative information. I think this is what has to be brought out clearly, because it's not qualitative. This is actually observations and measurements that are being taken. So to understand how your potential operational costs related to any environment or climate related aspects, with satellites, you can have a variety of measurements that does not just involve the solar radiation. You can understand the problem that potentially could come with clouds or dust, and you can actually be able to dig deep and dive into your portfolio and understand how your risk is spread across the portfolio related to environmental and climate aspect. But that's not just it. This can also help you. Imagine you want now to come to the aspect where you want to understand your output at risk. Because with satellite, yes, you are in the tropical area. What is the exposure? Is not necessary maybe for solar, but how vulnerable are you? So with satellite, it gives the kind of information that allows the financial institutions to make better decisions with real-time information. You can forecast, you can create scenarios, and With the technology advancing, it is mixed with AI, machine learning, and all these capabilities makes it even more lucrative to be used. And currently, this is what the space application industry is trying to bring to the market and make it knowledgeable and understandable to financial institutions, not just maps, but things that really make sense, that you can actually get numbers and plug into your other risk models and, come up with an integrated system.
Thank you, Luis, for your very clear explanations. And now perhaps we have the perspective of a potential new user of space data with Antonella. So Antonella, you represent here a very large bank, and some months ago you signed an MOU with the LSA, so with us, on working together towards using space technology for your company. Could you maybe tell us a bit more and tell the audience more why, what piqued your interest, and what are your expectations from this MOU?
Yes, thank you, Alessandro, and thank you to all of you for inviting me to, in fact, talk about Space for Finance and this MOU that we signed as European Investment Bank with the Luxembourg Space Agency. An MOU, whereas the Bank Act has a player in the R&D development. So I will answer your question, Alessandro, addressing why we signed this memorandum in Luxembourg, what we are trying to do, and the forward-looking vision behind. So we signed the memorandum with a national space agency here in Luxembourg because we believe Luxembourg is the center of excellence both for space and financial technology. So Luxembourg is the third country in terms of GDP investment on space, is home to a very thriving ecosystem of new space companies, over 100 companies registered. Moreover, in terms of finance, we are the world hub for sustainable finance, the stock exchange being where the bonds are listed. We, the bank, were the first to launch a sustainable bond. So it happened for us to believe that Luxembourg is the perfect place to be leader in space for finance. So what are we trying to do? And I'm going somehow on a high-level consideration because the agreement with the LSA is related to a development of an R&D program. So in this first phase, we want to prove the concept that space for finance applications are mature enough to spread the voice to other financial institutions so that the time for early adoption has come. So what we are trying to do, pragmatically, is that we have selected a set of key projects in our portfolio. Of course, I cannot reveal which one they are. They will act as test base to measure how space technology, the one that Professor Hoffman illustrated, can be used to monitor effectively our indicators. As you know, we are bound by the European taxonomy to report very accurately on these monitor indicators. These monitor indicators rely on data, rely on quantitative measures, very often provided by our promoters, but verified by the bank and sometimes by auditors. So to have a critical, let's say, instrument to ensure that this data is proven analytically, that reflect the reality, is essential. And space data, the images and the transformation of these inputs in what we could say actionable inputs for this measure is key. It's the only instrument, in fact, that could enable all of us, because LuxFlag, many other issuers rate companies are in the same game, to accurately quantify the monitor indicators backing the portfolio, as Luis mentioned. Now, are we ready for having this space for finance solution to be adapted tomorrow? The answer is it takes a little bit of development time because Europe has over 600 companies operating on the Earth observation ecosystem, producing data analytics, data system to the benefit of wider user, including governments and including financial institutions, but we are not yet there to the point of delivery. So if an institution like ours or yours would like to procure this service, let's say, out of the shelf, these are not available. So we need to develop this service to work as users, as key players, to ensure that the companies who are called to develop this service meet our requirements. So requirement in terms of reliability, integrity, data protocol. And then I come to the why. Why is so important, this initiative? And I think in 1 or 2 years' time, we will really present in the result of this R&D, and we will say, we set the game, because at stake there is nothing but European sovereignty in financial services. This is a domain on which, of course, the Commission is looking at. What if this data, these images are provided not by European companies, but by foreign companies? They will have very detailed, high-resolution data and images on our critical infrastructure, on our key projects. What use can they do? Whereas what we want to do with the LSA, and together with all of you, in fact, with European ecosystems, to ensure that the space for finance technologies made in Europe meet the acquis communautaire. And not to be over-regulated, but just to ensure that data protection is high on the agenda, protocols, data protocols and storage as well is high on the agenda, so that data that can be sensitive also for security and military use are not misused by third parties. So that's why also Luxembourg is the perfect place, as Professor Hoffman mentioned. You know, we have a supercomputer, we have data storage here, we can set the protocols. So we can, at the same time, have a nice forward, because space data and AI will go hand in hand. And my feeling is that AI companies will look at space for finance as the potential treasure to extract profitabilities. And so there is the risk that data can be manipulated, can be enhanced, can be distorted. Unless we set clear rule once again on the game, we have an Artificial Intelligence Act. This needs to be enacted on space for finance to ensure that the governance and the protocol of the data is fit for the purpose that we have to meet our development goals, to meet our goals of funding projects that reach impact.
Thank you very much, Antonella, and indeed we are really looking forward to develop these solutions together with you, with the EIB.
And thank you, the LSA, for this cooperation.
Yeah. And maybe if we pass then to Sabrina, you can bring also a wider perspective, having your feet in many of these topics. Perhaps let's start with the reporting aspects. How do you think it's possible to bridge the gap between space and ESG reporting?
Yeah, you can hear me well? Yeah, perfect. Well, good question. And also thank you, Alessandro and panelists and LuxFlag and Jane for the invitation. So maybe before I jump into it, how many of you are familiar with ESG reporting? Yeah, okay, that's a good sign. So when you're looking at ESG reporting, a lot of the time what happens is you're making assumptions, you're looking at kind of your tier one value chain. There's a bit of complexities around, okay, what data do we need? How do we obtain the data? What is defined as good quality data? So what we're seeing right now is that there are significant gaps in the data, the need, and actually what is being produced in a report, and also the value of that. You know, when we talk about ESG reporting, we don't just want it to be for the sake of a report. We want it to be impactful as well. And so this is where the space industry comes into it. This is where actually, you know, the panelists who have showcased some of the essential projects that are going on really make sense in this domain. So when we talk about space-based data, we're talking about not just the imagery, but also the analysis of it. So it's how do you go from actually obtaining real-time or almost real-time data that you can actually accurately measure in space, bring that down to Earth and make informed decisions. And that's where the gap between space and ESG reporting comes into play. We've heard a lot about CSRD. I think most of you are probably familiar with that, right? Yeah, CS3D. Yeah, I hope. And that's exactly where space should be playing a role, where there should be that streamlined effect of that data flow essentially into these reports. I'll give you an example. When you're looking at your emissions or methane, and I know there's a company here also looking at how companies can track methane and then actually report on that. When we're doing that, a lot of the methodologies that are used are either spend-based, so you're attributing tons of carbon equivalent emissions and so on to financial figures. But that's very inaccurate. And actually that has a degree of almost 90% inaccuracy. And so space-based data allows you to essentially report on something that is a lot more accurate. I'm not saying 100% all the time, but very close to that. And that helps, again, make your report not just a report, but actually what are you going to do with that? How are you then going to expand? How are you actually going to reduce your emissions? Now you know that your site in area X is actually very inefficient because of the materials. So what are you going to do from that to improve that for the year going forward? And so maybe that was just a high-level introduction, but the link between ESG reporting, space is very evident, but it's not used very much. And maybe later we'll get to that about why it's not used. And I think most of you sitting here up until recently have probably not seen how you bridge the gaps between reporting, ESG, and space. A lot of the time we think space is for astronauts, but I promise you it's also for all of us as well.
Thank you, Sabrina. And perhaps now an open questions to the panel. And Sabrina already briefly introduced the topic. So space data has been there for a while, especially Earth observation data. So why do you think it's not yet very widely adopted, at least by the financial community?
I can take that out and then I'll stop talking and pass it over to the panelists. So in my previous roles, working very heavily in the space sector, also in consulting and in ESG reporting, one thing I find is that there's a lack of understanding. I touched on it briefly, but again, sorry, I'm giving you all an exercise here, but how many of you have been familiar with the role of space in ESG? I think we see like 2, 3 hands, 4 hands. And that's exactly it. So what are the mechanisms to actually communicate why space should be playing a role, and again, making it not seem so far out of reach? And that's really why we're doing things like this panel, to actually bring it down to earth almost. There's also not been a huge amount of use cases, and I think Antonella touched on that. We as Europe and as an industry are somewhat behind in terms of adopting new technologies, in terms of being somewhat risk prone or so on. And then maybe one other point to touch on is that sustainability up until now has very much been seen as a nice to have for a lot of organizations in Europe. When you're doing something as a nice to have, your board of directors, your C-suite are somewhat reluctant to put money towards certain initiatives. In order to actually use space-based data, you might need a certain amount of investment into that, whether it's through a team, whether it's through an additional firm helping you or third party. And that we've not seen yet. We've not seen the uptake of those firms, those specialists, to be able to translate space-based data to organizations. And until we can change mindsets and that whole change management aspect, especially at the C-suite level, we might see that there is a slow pace of adoption. But yeah, that's my take on it.
I see. I completely agree that we see this also as a kind of awareness raising session. It's also true that until, let's say, 10 years ago, the space data could not deliver you the service. that was more, let's say, at the research side, development side. We had the necessary data to show the feasibility of the usefulness of space data, but to offer it as a worldwide service, the data were simply not available worldwide at the temporal resolution you need, at the spatial resolution you need. But now with all these new constellations, we have the data. We can now deliver a service to extract the information that is available. And of course, also with this goes along the necessity of IT infrastructure. You need to store this data, and then you need to handle them with AI and so on. So I think now also the ecosystem is ripe enough, mature enough, to deliver a service and this worldwide, which was not the case 5-10 years ago. We could do a feasibility study, but this was not enough, of course, also for a company consultant to deliver a service worldwide that is reliable and timely.
If I may say, as a user perspective, we engaged, for example, 2 years ago with ESA, on a first pilot of Space for Finance. And it's evident that Europe is leader when it comes to space capacity. So the number of image and inputs available free of charge is the widest in the world, because we have among the best satellites also positioned to take the right image on our territory. The problem is about developing the services that could be user-friendly. So if you now go to Copernicus and you want to download all the data available for flooding risk, it is not easy. It's not like press a button and the service is available. It's a huge data set with multiple dimensions of complexities. And so, yeah, the services are not there. And this is exactly why we engaged in this user case to accelerate the development of new services. As I mentioned before, they're not yet out-of-the-shelf Space for Finance solutions. They will be in 2 years, and Europe and Luxembourg can be world leader on that. But we need to have the companies who invest, as Luis said, to translate this data, and Sabrina, into analytics, into ready to use. And I could say that Google Earth is already watching us, and they have, for example, compounded a service, Google Earth, with data analytics that they go in that direction. We want to go a step further to have these data analytics that are in real time, reliable, meeting all acquis communautaire, because it's a necessity also to ensure that if we report, as Sabrina will say, accuracy quantitatively, there is no distortion because of AI. AI can create a lot of distortion. So we must be sure that there are no distortion indirectly introduced. And we want to own somehow these interlinkages. So the reason why I'm here is because it's an invitation, in fact, as Professor Hoffman said, to all of you to become early adopters. Because the more we engage with the companies as users, the more we stimulate the companies to develop the right service to meet our needs. So it takes some time, some development time, as Professor Hoffman was saying, investment, but it has an amazing return on investment, because then I'm an industrial economist, will set first mover advantage. We will set the advantage in Europe and in Luxembourg to have the know-how, the track records to ensure that these technologies evolve in line with our needs.
Just to touch up on this and to really emphasize on what Antonella said, it's really true. I think for me, the fundamental thing that is hindering adoption of satellite technology in finance industry is the technology know-how, and the idea like it has not been demystified. Everybody majority of the financial institutions, their core business is not really in data and analytics. They're financial people. But if this data was presented in a way that is more absorbable for them to just plug and play in the system, this could really accelerate the uptake. And now with technology, this is very possible, you know. You don't need to be able to process satellite data to get just simply land surface temperature, which can inform you if your asset is under a high fire, fire risk area, It is so easy, the data is accessible, but we need maybe to enhance and make it more accessible and friendlier to the end user, and the adaptability will be at a faster rate. Thank you.
And I think also that Luxembourg can really position itself as this as a unique selling point to develop this space-enabled intelligence for the finance sector. The government has heavily invested also in archiving all the Earth observation data. So there's archives that are available here in Luxembourg that are hosted by the Luxembourg Space Agency. We have the high-performance computing facilities. We have the AI capacity. So if we bring all of this together, we can really develop a Luxembourg, let's say, competence center in space-enabled intelligence for the for the finance sector.
Yeah, I just wanted to also add, follow up on kind of a practical use case. So one of the projects that I recently worked on was for a bank. I won't throw out names right here, but was for a bank. And the bank actually wanted to understand, say, what level of investment they should put into an organization that was based in a region that was predicted to be affected by climate change. At that point, they could make all the predictions using the figures that they had, but they realized in order to make an accurate assessment, they wanted to use space-based data. So that's where they turned to us, and we worked with a few different firms to actually do this, what we would call it a climate risk analysis. And that then enabled us to actually show what the region or the changes of the region over a certain period of time, what was a prediction of that region in the next, say, 6 months, 1 year, and 2 years based on the data that we've seen. And they were able to make an informed decision, and in the end actually didn't invest because it was a bit too, what we would say, risky, given the potential extreme weather events and what we've seen as of late. Good decision, because actually that region was not, was quite badly affected quite soon after that project was done. So the point is that actually this is very practical, and in the end the bank ended up saving millions because of that. And so that's really just a prime example of there's a financial benefit to the adoption of space-based data within climate risk assessments, with even social projects, and when we talk about migration patterns and so on. And so space is such a big domain, and we could talk about this for hours. But yeah, there's many benefits, and actually for sustainable finance solutions, it's out there. And I guess the point is, and what we're all trying to say is, discuss, learn, and we promise you there will be a positive payoff and a great return on investment by the end of it.
Thank you. So you all gave a really enthusiastic pitch about using space data, which is very good. So the question is now, let's say you pick the interest of someone in the audience that is actually keen to explore what space could do for his organization. What would be now the first step that this person has to do? Who would he talk to? And then how could he set up such a tool within his organization? Maybe Antonella, yes?
I can share our experience. The reason why I'm involved in Space for Finance is because I specialize in space technologies, and by nature, I'm a finance person. So Space for Finance is an interlink between space technologies and finance technologies. So we need both competence. So the first action could be for financial institution to approach space specialists. So we have here many students, Jane mentioned, we have masters in space technologies in Luxembourg. So this student should not only be recruited by space companies. In fact, their presence in the financial institution will be the sort of bridge necessary for the institution itself to engage on space for finance technology. So early adoption, R&D thinking, by the way, that's exactly where we are behind the US, but we have all the capabilities, is what is necessary on space for finance in terms of future leadership. So we need to integrate the two words of space, the dynamics that we have built here in Luxembourg on the new space economy with the very powerful dynamics on finance. If the two words speak to each other, if the people integrate better, then each single institution, consultant, or a company can be a promoter, can be an actor in this game changing. I do believe that Luxembourg in 2-3 years' time will again set the advantage that the launch of the first sustainable bond gave to Luxembourg in terms of sustainable finance.
Yeah, I was going to say, I really resonate with that. I go to a lot of space conferences and we talk about this topic and then everyone's like, yeah, because everyone is a space nerd. And, when you're talking to the same people again and again, or the same type of people who are in your field, you're not necessarily going to make the difference. It's really forums like this where you can bring this topic to industry, where you can actually truly discuss with people from different backgrounds around, well, what space can do. And I've realized I'm really plugging in for space right now. I'm not trying to sell you guys space. But the point is that once different people, once different industries come together and actually have these discussions, you start breaking down the barriers, and that's where the term accessible comes into play. And the taboo of kind of space is way far-reaching, kind of gets broken down as well. So yeah, definitely resonate with what Antonella said.
And I think for the space sector, of course, people working in the space sector is also very much important to understand what are your specific needs. You do not have the same needs than someone working on precision agriculture or flood management. You have your own specific needs in the reporting, on the recurring period, the spatial resolution, timely resolution, and so on. So we also need to still better probably understand what are your needs in the banking sector, insurance sector, in the funds, and so on. And they are also not the same, the needs that you may have.
Just to add on that, I would just say now space is not for large-scale projects. Like you have 100 assets, you have 5. Try and see if it works for you. It can be customized for all kinds, of sizes of projects that you have. You don't have to go big. You just try small, see if it works for you, and know the best way forward.
Thank you to all. And now we have a few minutes open for some questions from the audience. Is there anybody who has a pressing question? We're not done yet, but it's still time for questions.
So yeah, we have.
Thank you for your interesting insights, and I have no doubt about the potential of the technology for validating environmental data. What my doubt is in terms of the sustainability of the space technology itself and about the main issue I think there is, because when I'm not a professional in space, so maybe I'm wrong, but I came across some frightening numbers and projections about, as Dr. Hoffman was already saying, the number of satellites and technology inside the orbit is increasing rapidly. And so actually, while we think of space as limited, unlimited, the orbit actually is limited. So I would be interested to hear what if you can give me some outlook on this challenge.
Yeah, sure. So one of my previous roles was heading up space sustainability for SES, so the satellite company. So space is not unlimited, just FYI, as you mentioned as well. The analogy I like to use is what we've done on Earth in terms of pollution. We've kind of done in space. So things are getting quite crowded up there, and that's where the term space sustainability comes from. In addition, when you talk about the environmental sustainability of the space industry, when we talk about missions or space missions, they are quite long-lasting. They're not in terms of 1 or 2 years. Usually, well, depending on which orbit you're in, they can last up to 15, sometimes even 20 years with life extension. So they're long-term projects. So all the manufacturing, everything that goes into it is done in a way that there is longevity to it. We are seeing things like Starlink and so on that maybe are changing the game. And so maybe, sorry, just a quick background. You have 3 major orbits. You have low Earth orbit, medium Earth, and geo. So the closer you are to Earth, the more satellites you need in order to actually cover the whole domain. The further away you are, the less satellites you need, but I would say the lower resolution, or spatial resolution, meaning your quality isn't going to be as good and it might take longer. So because of that, we've mainly been operating in MEO and GEO, so the space industry. We're seeing more and more players in LEO. If you're in LEO, the lifetime of satellites is actually shorter, so all of the Starlink satellites are around 5 to 7 years. So this is where the issue of sustainability comes in. But LSA, the European Space Agency, there's a lot of work and funding that's going into ensuring the viability of the space industry, the environmental sustainability of the space industry. So that's why actually there's a lot of emphasis on how do we not just do space for exploration, but how do you benefit Earth and how do you limit the effect? So how do you limit the amount of rare earth materials? How do you limit the number of launches? And there's a lot of work going into that, I would say. But yeah, really good question, so thanks.
Thank you, Sabrina. So very quickly, last question. We have a few seconds left.
Yeah, one more question. 2 questions, because one of my students wants to ask a question. But if you can keep it short.
Thank you, Jane. Complete disclosure, I have a company in the space sector in Luxembourg. We are a graduate of the Pioneer Fit for Start Space. You're talking about space for finance. I'd like to ask the reverse, how about finance for space? As you know, the problem is not technology in Europe, the problem is scale-up funding. There's a huge valley of death in Europe, which is why a lot of great European companies move across the pond. What is being done concretely to enable those companies to flourish in a European ecosystem? And obviously for me, it's a rhetorical question because I already have the answer. Thank you.
Maybe Antonella?
I have written 2 reports on this. I know the issues very well, but we have to set the right question. So the problem is not per se finance. The problem is the profitability of the new space companies. And that's why space for finance can be also a game changer for new space companies, because if there is a market for this service, so governments, as Professor Hoffman was mentioning, local authorities, companies can ask space data, for building also their digital twin of their own building, for example, to know what is my consumption. So the more user we have, the wider is the market, the wider, let's say, are the revenues that we can hand over to the companies in the sector. And rest assured that whenever there is a positive revenue and cash flow, also for new space companies, funding is available in Europe. The problem is that many companies, many new space companies, don't reach this positive cash flow.
Thank you, Antonella. So I give the last question.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Collins, and I'm a student from University of Luxembourg, Sustainable Finance. And by the way, Jane is my lecturer. So Yeah, my question is in line with space data, right? Lois, you spoke about space data and its importance in risk assessment, right? And we know risk assessment too is very key in the financial sector. But in spite of this importance of this data, yet the financial system or the financial sector has not really come to grapple with the importance of it, and they are not utilizing it for their benefit. My question is, in spite of this benefit of, or this huge benefit of this space data, why is the financial sector still not seeing its importance? Right. So I don't know if Lois can answer this question.
I would try, but because I'm more on the trying to convince them to use it, I'm not more on the user. But we've talked to a number of financial institutions who are trying to really understand their pain point and what is really holding them back. The simple answer is they still don't see where the immediate value is. You know, for them, what we have come to learn is they have a variety of things like, I want information on my asset. Can you, in real time and on a large scale, give me physical risk of my asset distributed globally? The answer is yes. But then we are yet to really demonstrate to them, like, how does it really work, you know? And also, they need to understand how they can integrate this into their existing system, because we cannot operate in silos. So what needs to be done, and which might work for financial institution, is we convert this space data, not just data, they want the analytics, so that they can plug already into their system that nothing much has to change. They have really to operate in sync. That's what I think is missing, and to make them understand space data is not out of reach, it is really within reach.
I think that finishes the panel. We have the big overtime symbol here that is flashing red. So thank you very much, and feel free to reach out to any of us after the panel as well.